In the early hours of June 14, 2025, Minnesota was jolted awake. The sharp crack of gunfire tore through the stillness of a quiet suburban street in Brooklyn Park. A woman collapsed on her front porch, lifeless before she hit the ground. That woman was Minnesota State Representative Melissa Hortman, a prominent figure in the Democratic Party and a tireless advocate for abortion rights and gender equality. Seconds later, her husband, Mark Hortman, rushed out from the living room. But before he could even dial 911, he too was gunned down. Just minutes later, only 20 miles away, another attack erupted in the city of Champlin. State Senator John Hoffman, a close legislative ally of Melissa's, was shot in his own home. His wife, Yvette, was also critically wounded. What followed was one of the most intense manhunts in recent Minnesota history, 43 hours of fear, confusion, and chaos. Police, FBI agents, and domestic terrorism units were mobilized in force. Blood, panic, and disbelief rippled through communities that once felt safe. And a single question began to haunt the entire state: who could have done this? And why? Vance Luther Boelter was the kind of man you'd never look twice at. 57 years old. Born July 23, 1967, in the rural town of Green Isle, Minnesota. He once managed a local 7-Eleven before moving into private security work. At some point, he launched a company with a name ripped straight from a Roman history book, Praetorian Guard Security Services. Its website portrayed it as a tactical outfit, SUVs painted like police cruisers, staff in SWAT-style uniforms. Boelter claimed he had worked as a private security contractor in the Middle East and Africa, though there was no evidence to back that up. Behind the professional front was a man deeply religious, to the point of extremism. Friends and acquaintances described him as a devout Christian, heavily involved in a local evangelical church, and active in campaign efforts for former President Donald Trump. Ironically, Boelter had once been appointed to a state workforce development board under 2 Democratic governors. A strange twist, considering what would come later. But Boelter wasn't just a businessman or a churchgoer. He was also a missionary who once traveled to the Democratic Republic of Congo, preaching about moral decay and denouncing abortion. It was under the cover of this faith and morality that Boelter began building a kill list. This wasn't a spontaneous act. He planned it for months. He took notes, watched routines, mapped out what he believed to be a righteous mission. When law enforcement searched his vehicle, they found a thick notebook packed with names between 45 and 70 targets: Democratic politicians, community leaders, pro-choice advocates, healthcare workers, and anyone he viewed as morally corrupt. Among those names were 2 high-profile targets: Melissa Hortman, 50, Speaker of the Minnesota House of Representatives, a Democrat known for championing reproductive rights, gender equality, and public health; John Hoffman, 60, Minnesota State Senator, a vocal supporter of abortion rights, and someone who had previously served alongside Boelter on a state advisory board. They weren't chosen at random. And what's most chilling, Boelter didn't act out of greed. He acted out of belief. And on the early morning of June 14, 2025, he put that belief into motion. He didn't show up as a drifter. He came as authority. Boelter arrived at his target's homes in a black SUV disguised as a police vehicle. He wore tactical gear, a fake badge, and disturbingly lifelike silicone mask, transforming him into a phantom in uniform. Inside his car, multiple firearms, dozens of loaded magazines, a handwritten manifesto filled with cryptic declarations, and flyers titled "No Kings," rejecting government, glorifying extremist individualism. This happened against the backdrop of a deeply divided America, a country fractured by debates over abortion, healthcare, religion, and identity. Boelter wasn't a member of any known extremist group, but he was proof that a single radicalized individual, fueled by twisted faith and moral absolutism, can become a domestic threat. Authorities continue to investigate. More targets may still be at risk. And the message from law enforcement is clear: watch for the warning signs before belief turns into bloodshed. Between 1:40 and 2 a.m. on June 14th, in the quiet, residential neighborhood of Champlin, Minnesota, Vance Boelter stood outside the home of State Senator John Hoffman. He wore a mock police uniform, a badge-emblazoned cap, a latex mask that distorted his identity, and carried a 9mm handgun with a shoulder radio, looking every bit like a real officer. He knocked loudly and called out, "Police!" The Hoffman family, startled awake, opened the door to check. But something wasn't right. The man at their doorstep was wearing a mask. When the deception became too obvious, Boelter dropped the act and said bluntly, This is a robbery. As soon as the door cracked open, he drew his weapon and opened fire. Gunshots ripped through the night. Senator John Hoffman was hit 9 times as he tried to fight back, shots to the torso, chest, and limbs. His wife, Yvette, was struck 8 times, mostly in the abdomen and legs. They both collapsed where they stood. Miraculously, they survived and were rushed to the hospital. The 911 call came from a most heartbreaking source, their daughter, who had witnessed the attack from inside the home. By the time police arrived, Boelter was gone, leaving behind shell casings, blood stains, and tire marks burned into the driveway. In a brief public statement days later, Yvette Hoffman said he took 9 bullets. "I took 8. We're just lucky to be alive." At 2:24 a.m., just minutes after fleeing Champlin, Boelter drove north to Maple Grove, the home of State Representative Kristen Bonner, another name on his hit list. But this time there was no knock, no commands, no gunshots, no forced entry. He simply parked outside, watched the house in silence, jotted a few notes in his notebook, and drove off. Next, he headed to New Hope, the residence of Senator and Rest, one of Minnesota's longest-serving Democratic lawmakers. The same pattern repeated. Boelter remained in his SUV, watching the house from a distance. No approach, no break-in, just a disturbing, calculated stillness. Later, authorities confirmed that both Bonner and Rest were on Boelter's kill list. He didn't skip them out of mercy, only because, as he noted in his journal, the timing wasn't right. Though he didn't pull the trigger, the intent was crystal clear. Each stop was planned. Each target premeditated. Nothing was random. Boelter then turned south. His final destination, the home of Rep. Melissa Hortman and her husband, Mark, in Brooklyn Park. By now, following the Champlin shooting, police had issued alerts to lawmakers believed to be at risk. Melissa Hortman's home was one of them. A patrol unit was dispatched nearby, but Boelter moved too fast. At 2:35 a.m., he struck. Within 30 seconds, he shot Melissa Hortman the moment she opened her front door. Her husband, Mark, ran out from the living room and was gunned down instantly. Unlike the Hoffmans, they didn't survive. Boelter escaped through the backyard, abandoning his fake police SUV and vanishing just before patrol units arrived. On the front porch, scattered 9mm casings, pools of blood, a shattered front door. Torn apart by the force of the initial blast, police later searched the abandoned SUV and found an arsenal inside. 5 firearms, including semi-automatic rifles and assault weapons, dozens of loaded magazines, handwritten notebooks, filled with disturbing details in one journal. He had meticulously documented Melissa Hortman's daily habits, even breaking down her political influence analysis like a military dossier. His notes didn't stop with her. They spanned a chilling number of individuals: lawmakers, abortion rights supporters, healthcare workers, public policy influencers. Each name was deliberate, each entry filled with judgment. Investigators concluded that Boelter didn't act on impulse. He studied his targets, watched them, ranked them, all according to his twisted logic of who deserved punishment. Also found in the SUV, a flyer promoting an anti-Trump protest titled "No Kings," scheduled for June 15th. Seemingly minor, but telling. Boelter didn't fit into any one political box. He wasn't a Republican extremist, nor a left-wing radical. His ideology was a volatile, paranoid cocktail of extremism, vengeance, and confusion. You'd think someone impersonating a cop, murdering elected officials in their own homes, would have reached the peak of madness by then. But Boelter wasn't finished. Sometime around 2:36 a.m., mere minutes after the Hortman murders, he drove back to New Hope, right outside the home of Senator and Rest. Once again, he parked quietly in front of her house, his SUV still marked to resemble law enforcement. Upon receiving an emergency alert about the shooting of Senator Hoffman, New Hope police quickly dispatched a welfare check unit to the homes of lawmakers in the area. When the officer arrived, he noticed an SUV quietly parked along the curb. Assuming it belonged to another unit, he walked up, lowered the window, and tried to make contact. But the man inside said nothing. He just sat there, staring straight ahead, expressionless, unmoving. Sensing something was wrong, the officer stepped away to inspect the house and called for backup. But by the time other units arrived, Boelter had vanished. No noise, no struggle, just a few minutes too late. And he was gone. The following Monday morning, Senator and Rest confirmed she had been the intended target that night. So what does this tell us? Boelter avoided direct confrontation with police, but he didn't flinch when they approached. That level of calm, even in close proximity to law enforcement, suggested something chilling. A man not acting on impulse, but operating with extreme control and calculated boldness. The way he disguised himself as a cop, carried himself with precision, left behind almost no trace, and timed his attacks with surgical accuracy, led authorities to a stark conclusion. This was a mission-driven killer. Deliberate, methodical, a twisted reflection of law enforcement, a cop in reverse. And now the picture was clear: a meticulously planned assault. A man disguised as an officer. 2 locations. 2 lawmakers. 1 night of bloodshed. The moment the shootings unfolded in the early hours of June 14th, in both Champlin and Brooklyn Park, Minnesota law enforcement launched a full-scale statewide manhunt. Authorities quickly classified the attacks as one of the most serious politically motivated crimes in the state's modern history, and Vance Boelter was still on the run. Armed, dangerous, unpredictable. Nearly every law enforcement agency in the state was activated. The manhunt rapidly expanded across Minnesota, involving over 20 SWAT teams, helicopters, and surveillance drones, federal agencies, including the FBI, state troopers, and specialized local task forces in Brooklyn Park, where 2 people had just been murdered. Authorities issued a shelter-in-place order. Residents were told not to open their doors unless at least 2 uniformed officers were present, and to report any suspicious individuals or vehicles immediately. The FBI announced a $50,000 reward for information leading to Boelter's arrest. By noon that day, investigators caught their first real lead. A mechanical fragment, believed to be from Boelter's SUV, was found near Green Isle, the small rural town where he was born. Detectives followed the trail. Quietly, they tightened the perimeter. Just a few hours earlier, at 10 a.m., Boelter's wife had been stopped in the town of Onamia. Inside her vehicle, 2 handguns, $10,000 in cash, passports for the entire family, she was detained and questioned. Her initial statements gave investigators critical clues, suggesting that Boelter may have been preparing to flee the state. Then, at 8:25 p.m., a local resident in Green Isle spotted Boelter on a trail camera. They alerted authorities. Instantly, hundreds of officers mobilized. Drones began sweeping the woods. K-9 units deployed to pick up a scent. Ground teams encircled the forest near a property formerly owned by Boelter. Just 20 minutes later, they found him crawling through brush, roughly a mile from the house. He was unarmed, dressed in dark clothing, and wearing a baseball cap for camouflage. Surrounded, Boelter offered no resistance. He raised his hands, emerged from the undergrowth, and was handcuffed on the spot. In a Buick sedan abandoned near Highway 25, investigators discovered even more damning evidence. A handwritten letter to the FBI, signed Dr. Vance Luther Boelter, in which he confessed to the shootings and admitted he was in hiding a cowboy hat seen in surveillance footage following the attacks, an electric bicycle, hastily purchased after the shootings, presumably for a quiet, undetectable escape. The FBI confirmed that Boelter had been planning the attack for a long time. According to Alvin Thompson, head of the FBI's Minneapolis field office, Boelter kept multiple notebooks packed with detailed attack plans. He studied personal information, home addresses, even the family members of the politicians on his list. He tracked them, watched their homes, and wrote everything down. This wasn't just a murder, it was a calculated execution. Yet despite Boelter's rants against moral decay, his anti-abortion stance, and his meticulous documentation, the FBI stated that they found no formal political manifesto or clear ideological doctrine. What's obvious is this: he wanted to kill people. And those people all had one thing in common: they were elected officials, all Democrats. Anyone trying to read more into that is reaching too far. Even while on the run, Boelter was sending cryptic messages to a family group chat, cold, distant, and haunting. "Dad went into battle last night. I won't say more so I don't implicate anyone." In private message to his wife, he wrote, "There are no words to express how sorry I am. Armed men will be coming to the house. I don't want you or the kids to get hurt." When authorities captured him, Boelter was unarmed. He had left his weapons behind in the vehicle. Dressed in dark clothes and a baseball cap, he had blended easily into the forest underbrush. State Representative Esther Beige, whose name appeared on Boelter's hit list, admitted she had left her home and stayed with friends during the search. "Only now, with him in custody, can we finally breathe," she said. Senator and Rest, who nearly became another victim that night, shared her relief. "The swift actions of law enforcement quite literally saved my life." The 43-hour manhunt for Vance Boelter didn't just shake Minnesota, It sent a chilling warning across the country. When extreme beliefs overpower reason, even a lone individual can become the architect of tragedy. The investigation is still ongoing. Officials are working to understand Boelter's full motives, his timeline, and how security blind spots allowed him to get this far. But one thing is painfully clear: had he not been stopped, Boelter was ready to keep killing. When the manhunt ended and Vance Boelter was finally in custody, one question echoed everywhere. Why? Boelter wasn't homeless. He wasn't an addict. He wasn't an outcast. He had no criminal record. In fact, he seemed like the kind of person any quiet neighborhood would welcome. A father of 5, a husband, a devout churchgoer who bowed his head in prayer every Sunday, a business owner, a man who had once taught Bible lessons in Africa, and now a killer in a silicone mask responsible for one of the most serious political attacks in modern Minnesota history? According to 2 law enforcement officials, investigators recovered the following from Boelter's fake police SUV: lists of state lawmakers, community leaders, and healthcare providers, known abortion rights supporters, detailed notes on clinics and care facilities. Both Senator John Hoffman and Representative Melissa Hortman, the 2 shooting victims, were outspoken advocates for reproductive rights in the Minnesota legislature. The entries in Boelter's notebooks were not random. They were methodical, targeted, driven by ideology. Former friends and colleagues describe Boelter as soft-spoken and deeply religious. He regularly attended services at Jordan Family Church, a small evangelical congregation in Minneapolis. He once campaigned for Donald Trump, but in his day-to-day life, he rarely spoke about politics and never displayed extremist behavior. But a different side began to emerge. In 2023, Boelter traveled to the Democratic Republic of Congo as a missionary. There, he claimed he met God for the first time since childhood. In a live-stream sermon in February 2023, he publicly stated, "Abortion is wrong." Most of his preaching revolved around sin, moral decay, and a call to return to personal faith. Investigators now believe Boelter may have kept his extremist views hidden, even from those closest to him. After returning from Africa, he took on a job collecting bodies for a funeral home, a grim, solitary role far removed from the pulpit he once stood behind. Just one day after the shootings, Jordan Family Church issued a public statement. This incident stands in direct opposition to the teachings of Jesus Christ. It has devastated our community and does not reflect the values or beliefs of our church. They added that Boelter had not been attending services regularly in recent months and were fully cooperating with investigators. Public records revealed that Boelter once served on the Minnesota Workforce Development Council, the same advisory body where Senator Hoffman had worked. However, there's no evidence they ever interacted directly. This raises a critical question. Did Boelter choose his targets based on ideology, or simply from public databases and internet searches? At a Sunday press conference, Drew Evans, director of the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, stated, "As of now, Boelter made no public threats prior to the attacks. No manifesto, no warning signs, no online rants, nothing." Evans added a clear warning: "We urge the public not to jump to conclusions about motive until the investigation is complete." Was it politics, religion, personal demons? Or was Boelter simply a man who quietly convinced himself that God had chosen him for a deadly mission? The answer is still unfolding through pages of notebooks, hours of interviews, and every second of those 43 harrowing hours. The truth is out there, and it's coming into focus. Monday morning, federal court, St. Paul. Vance Luther Boelter, once a missionary, once a public servant, was led into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, cold face, eyes fixed, unblinking. No more silicone mask, no weapons, only a weighty federal indictment before him, one that could end with a sentence of death. Federal prosecutors wasted no time. 6 serious charges, including 2 counts of federal murder, 2 counts of arms stalking, 2 counts of firearm use in violent crime, all related to the murders of Melissa and Mark Hortman and the attempted murders of John and Yvette Hoffman. At his hearing, Boelter spoke little. He quietly admitted he couldn't afford an attorney. The court appointed him a public defender and denied bail pending trial. U.S. Attorney Joseph Thompson declared, "These are capital offenses under federal law. Whether we pursue the death penalty will depend on the investigation and the suspect's psychological profile." On the state level, Hennepin County Attorney Mary Moriarty filed additional charges, 2 counts of second-degree murder, 2 counts of attempted murder. She made it clear, "These are the most serious charges we could file immediately to ensure detention." But we are preparing to upgrade to first-degree murder, the most serious offense in state law. Investigators allege Boelter impersonated law enforcement to get close to his targets, driving a black SUV resembling a patrol vehicle, wearing tactical body armor, carrying semi-automatic weapons, a high-powered flashlight, and most disturbingly, a hyper-realistic silicone mask modeled after a middle-aged white man, described as creepy by prosecutors. Security footage from Senator Hoffman's home captured Boelter's every step, calm, calculated, a scene straight out of a horror film, except this time it was real. While all evidence suggests Boelter acted alone, federal and state investigators aren't ruling anything out. Drew Evans, director of the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, stated, "So far, we've found no clear ties to any extremist organization. But we cannot rule out the possibility of connections to a larger underground network." The Department of Justice, FBI, and counterterrorism units are now combing through Boelter's digital history, social media, accounts the hit list recovered from his vehicle. Vance Boelter once stood at the pulpit, preaching about God and forgiveness. Now he stands before a court of law, facing the gravest charges imaginable and possibly paying for his crimes with his life. From a missionary in Congo to a masked man gunning down politicians on their front porches. What really turned him into a killer? What do you think? Was it ideology, madness, or something darker? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story gripped you, hit like and subscribe. More updates on this case and other true crime investigations are on the way. Thanks for watching and stay safe.